Okay, so Erev Tov to everybody, and as you can see, my wife told me that she likes the title of tonight's class, the Couples Cave. I have to, which by the way I think is the correct translation for Ma'arat HaMachpela. I think, and we're going to see in the Gemara from Eruvin, it's a machloket. We'll take a look at that in just a minute. But I think the pshat is, it is the couple's cave. But before we even go, this is like a disclaimer, because we're going to talk about whether it's right and appropriate to daven at all of these places. And I have to be honest, on a personal level, I love davening at Ma'arat HaMachpela. And you know, sadly in life, there have been difficult times, whether it was, you know, illness or whatever problems going on. And when I lived in the front, it was, you know, it was a relatively simple, you know, bus ride away to just go down to Ma'arat HaMachpela. And I would just sit there and you know, usually, you know, catch a minyan. Usually it ended up being mincha. And I would spend time in, you know, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the makeup of the building, but it's basically separated into different areas. It wasn't originally like that, but when we get to further down, I think it's the second paragraph. We get to the second paragraph, we'll talk about the structure itself. But the way it looks now, it's separated into different areas. So the largest of the rooms, we Jews can only go, I believe, if my memory is correct, it's 11 days a year. And that's by Yitzchak and Rivka. And I dafka went on a Chol HaMoed with Rivka, with my Rivka, because we wanted to go in, you know, to see when we could go to the room where her namesake is buried, or where they have the tziyun, the marker for her place. And what happened was, when we got there, they weren't letting women into that ulam, because that's where they were holding all the minyanim for mincha when we were visiting. And Rivka was so upset. So as soon as the minyan was over, she ran in and she stood next to the tziyun that said Rivka, got a quick picture, and then she ran out before the guards could catch her. But I like the room that is Yaakov and Leah, because my father, Olav Shalom, was Yaakov, that was his name, and my mother, Olav Shalom, was Leah. And so that room has always been, for me, a wonderful place to go for a little bit of meditation, a little bit of Tehillim. It's been a very meaningful experience to me. You know, if you know, we get very personal, right, Gail? You know, that's where our grandson was. You know, had his Brit Milah. That's where Yaakov had my oldest son, had his Chag. Was it Sidur or Chumash? It was Chumash. Chag Chumash, and my Yaakov also put on tefillin for the first time there. So I mean, it's a place that I've had. You know, I feel. Remember what happened Yeah, Yaakov can't remember 26 years ago. We were just talking about 60 years ago, but okay. But so it's like I have to admit, before we get into the discussion of whether or not you should be davening in these places, full disclosure, I do it. And Ma'arat HaMachpela is very, very special place for me personally. But okay, so let's start off with the famous Gemara from Eruvin. I should have gotten rid of the word apropos this dispute, but okay. Anyways, the Gemara cites a similar dispute between Rav and Shmuel with regard to the Machpela cave, in which the patriarchs and matriarchs are buried. Rav and Shmuel disagreed. One said the cave consists of 2 rooms. Machpela, from the word kefel, means doubled. So it's a double cave in that it has 2 rooms in it. Okay, one farther in than the other. And the other one said it consists of a room and a second story above it. The Gemara asks, granted, this is understandable according to the one who says the cave consists of one room above the other. Is that the meaning of Machpela double? However, according to the one who says it consists of two rooms, one farther than the other, what's special about that? Ordinary houses are like that. By the way, I don't know why they bothered to bring ordinary houses. Many caves are like that. Many caves are a series of one room inside another. If you go to the largest cave in the country, in Tekoa, Ma'arat HaMachpela, it's a series of rooms. That's just the way caves often are. But okay, so that doesn't seem like special. So then it comes to say, however, according to what I said, it consists of two rooms. Well, what sense is special? Rather, it's called Machpela in the sense that it doubled with the patriarchs and matriarchs who were buried there in pairs. So it is indeed the cave of the couples. So that seems to be why it's called Ma'arat HaMachpela. I mean, you can ask the question of how come it seemed to have been called Machpela before before Avram bought it. I'm not sure that that's true. It's just referred to that way, but I think it may be based upon the later name that it was called. But again, this brings up something very special about Ma'arat HaMachpela. It was the first piece of real estate that ever belonged to a Jew in Eretz Yisrael. So that's also very, very special, as well as all of the other things about it. So then it goes on to say that the city is called Kiryat Arba because it's the city of four. Why is it the city of four? Because there are four couples buried in Ma'arat HaMachpela. The Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak, Rivka, Yaakov, Leah, but also according to the Midrash, Adam and Chava. However, that's not pshat. The real reason it's called Kiryat Arba is, I know Rashi brings down another reason because there were four giants that lived there. But it seems like the real pshat on why was called Kiryat Arba is because archaeologists, we're going to talk about archaeologists just a minute, have discovered four walled places on the hills surrounding the center of Hebron. Apparently, initially there were four villages or four towns, four walled enclosures that at some point decided lechaber to join together. So apparently the reason it was called Kiryat City of Four, and then it was called Hebron, because Hebron means to join together, lechaber. And so the four towns got together. And that's one of the reasons why when you're at Ma'arat HaMachpela, you're in a valley. Normally when you're in ancient cities, you're on hilltops. But this particular downtown area, if you want to call it that, is in a valley because the four villages were on the hilltops around it. Okay, so we really love this location, but the fact that we love this location is a very long-standing historical reality. Next paragraph. In 2020, just a year ago, Israeli archaeologists led by David Ben Shlomo from Ariel University, Ariel, which is in the Shomron, only recently became a university, so Baruch Hashem for that, the 7th university in Israel, dated pottery from the caves recovered surreptitiously by local residents in 1981. I mean, we could tell a lot of stories about the shenanigans that went on in Hebron from 1967 until the mid-90s, when the Jews were trying so hard to get permission to live downtown there. But some of the things they did, one of them was, they did some surreptitious archaeological collections. To the 8th century BCE, the different origins of the shards from various areas around Hebron and Jerusalem suggest the site may have been a pilgrimage site as early as this date. People, Jews, went to visit the kever of our avot and imahot already almost 3,000 years ago. This whole idea of visiting Kivrei Avot is a very powerful tradition within Judaism that is very, very early. And as we see, it goes on. Between 31 and 4 BCE, Herod the Great, well, that's what the Romans called him. We don't, we don't think of him as so great because he was tough on Torah and Jews. But anyways, but he was great in terms of a builder. He's one of the great builders in world history. Built a large rectangular enclosure over the cave to commemorate the site for his subjects. It is the only fully surviving Herodian structure from the period. Okay, which is amazing. Herod's building with its 6-foot thick stone walls made from stones that were at least 3 feet tall and something to reach a length of 24 feet, did not have a roof. Archaeologists are not even certain whether the original entrance to the enclosure was located or even if there was one. Some people believe that the original building didn't have an entrance, that outside the building you could go into the cave and come up inside the enclosure, which was over the graves, without going through the walls. But today there are ways in through the walls, and those ways in through the walls, you can see that it's, very, very thick walls. This building, Ma'arat HaMachpela, is the world's oldest building still in use, which is just an amazing phenomenon. In other words, people, even when Rahman al-Islam, sadly, the temple has been destroyed, nobody ever stopped us from visiting Ma'arat HaMachpela all of these thousands of years, which is really remarkable. But over the centuries, buildings were built inside the Herodian enclosure. The most impressive building was actually built by the Crusaders in the 12th century, and that's now the big mosque that's over the Tzionim, the grave markers for Yitzchak and Rivka. That's the most impressive of the rooms, and today it's a mosque, but it was built by the Crusaders sometime in the 12th century while the Crusaders controlled that area. So we see, going back at least 8 centuries BCE, but definitely the time of Herod, and perhaps, I didn't read the sentence, but perhaps even the time of the Hashmonaim, people visited there. It was a place for Aliyat HaRegel, if you will, for a pilgrimage. But and this continued throughout the Middle Ages. Benjamin of Trudella, I'm not going to read this whole paragraph, but I'm just going to begin it. Benjamin of Trudella, who is often referred to as the Jewish Marco Polo, but he doesn't have a game. I mean, somebody should, there's that game, Marco Polo, but now we have to get a Benjamin Trudella. It doesn't work as well. But anyways, he was the Jewish Marco Polo, and he visited many Jewish communities, as you can see, in the 12th century, actually around the same time as the Marco Polo. So he wrote here that there is a great church called Saint Abram. So in other words, the Christians, when they built that very beautiful church, cathedral, whatever the right term is for this building, they called it Saint Abram. Now, I don't know, there may have been some goy named Abram, but it works out nicely that it's Avram Avinu, who we don't think of as a saint, but why not? Okay, he's saintly. And this was also a Jewish place of worship at the time of the Mohammedan rule. So we know Jews were going there when the Muslims came to Eretz Yisrael in 630 of the Common Era. Already, still, Jews continued. They couldn't go to Yerushalayim at that point because the Romans wouldn't let us, but Jews were going to Hebron. And so the connection between Jews and Hebron has been steady throughout the centuries. But the Gentiles have erected these 6 tombs respectively, called those of Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebecca, Jacob, and Leah. Okay, yada, yada, yada. Here's what's going on. There are in the building 6 major stone boxes. And those boxes, which I've been referring to as tziyunim, markers, are placed evenly throughout the building. Yaakov, Leah on the north side, Yitzchak, Rivka on the south side, and in the middle is Avraham and Sarah, and they're spaced evenly, even though that's not the way things are in the cave underneath. We'll talk about that in a minute. We'll get to that in just 1 minute, but that was done by Goyim, and we don't believe, we pretty much know that those beautiful tziyunim don't have any specific relationship to where the actual burial locations were for the patriarchs and matriarchs. And then he talks about how you could pay a custodian, bribery always worked, okay? That there would, pilgrims would go down there and that they would light candles, and that there were, and so all of that is indeed fascinating. Now, I didn't put it on the sheet. I should have. Okay, I forgot. Oh, I missed it. Okay, in 1968, right after the 6-Day War, Moshe Dayan went with a little girl, and he was together apparently with Shlomo Goren, Rav Goren, and they lowered into this small opening a young girl down into the cave below, and she took some pictures and she described it. And later, around 1980, for the last people that ever got in there, although this one there's some dispute, that some people claim that some people from the Jewish community of Hebron got in there, but what they saw was basically one room, which was relatively long and narrow and had 6 carved indentations in the walls of stone. This is natural stone. It was carved out, and then into the carved walls, and you can tell it's carved because you can see the chisel marks, okay? There were 6 what are called kuchim. A kuch is like, how do you say a kuch? It's like a niche. I think a niche is the best translation. And what they did was the bodies were laying in these indentations that were carved out of the wall, and there are 6. Forget about Adam and Chava. I don't know where they were, even though there's a tradition someplace else. But there were 6, and even though by the time we got to the second half of the 20th century, there was no remains of anything, but we do have a lot of evidence to the fact that, number one, we Jews have been going there for millennia, and number 2, that it seems to have really been meant for the burial of 6 people, because until the time of the Gemara, Jews were buried in caves, and we buried them in these kuchim, niches in the wall. And so it really looks like this is the right location. Okay, sidebar, before we go back to talk about Ma'arat HaMachpela and visiting graves. I have very little faith in most of the identifications of holy sites around Eretz Yisrael, especially graves. I'm very skeptical about Shmuel Navi. I'm skeptical about most of them, because most of the identifications of these holy sites come from the Middle Ages, and some of the identifications come from Muslims and Christians. and I'm very skeptical about most. And I hate to say it because I like to go to the kever of the Rashbi in Meron. I like to go to the kever of Reb Meir Balanes in Tveria, and I've davened at all these places and visited all. But I must be honest, I am quite skeptical if the original resident that they claim was ever there. Because, like I said, most of these identifications come from the Middle Ages, and many of the identifications don't even come from Jewish sources. And I loved, when I lived in Efrat, I used to love going by Kever Rachel, only I have my doubts that Rachel was ever there. That doesn't seem like the right location. Harabayit, Ma'arat HaMachpela, these are ancient identifications from Chazal, and those I don't think we can ever question. But these identifications, which come from, we don't even know where in many cases, and a much later, in the 1500, 1600, a lot of the identifications of graves in the Galil were done by the Ari in the 16th century, and it's, I don't know, it's just hard to identify them. There's even a big argument if the Rambam, who died in 1204, if the location in the middle of Tveria that is identified with him, there's a lot of question if that's the right location or not. There are graves in Tveria that we know are true because they're from the 17th and 18th centuries. We know the Shalah, who was buried there in the 17th century. We know where he was buried, and we know where the Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, was buried. But those are recent. But a lot of the grave identifications, most of them are iffy, but not Ma'arat HaMachpela. Not Ma'arat HaMachpela. Okay, back to the point here. Okay. So Benjamin of Trudella went there, and he bribed some guard, some custodian, to go down to the cave and got to see, which is wonderful. However, just 7 years after he wrote this, the Muslims under Saladin defeated the Christians at the Battle of the Horns of Hattin in the north, in the Galil, and the Arabs took over control of Ma'arat HaMachpela from 1187 until 1967. From 1187 till 1967, no Jew was allowed in the building. What a disgraceful fact. What they did was, outside the building, and we have since destroyed these steps, there was a stairway that went up into the building from the plaza, and Jews were allowed to go to the 7th step. And just to go to the 7th step, they had to bribe some Arab official, and then they weren't allowed to go any further. And the British continued to enforce this rule that Jews couldn't visit Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Leah. It's just unbelievable, But anyways, so for almost 800 years, Jews couldn't visit our own, Bubby and Zadie's kvarot. It's just unbelievable. If I could just tell you, quickly, one story. I didn't put it on the page. I only have it in Hebrew, and I was too lazy to translate it. The Imre Emes, the third Ger Rebbe, visited Eretz Yisrael in 1935. He visited Eretz Yisrael 6 times, and he eventually made Aliyah after World War II broke out. Okay, he went to visit Ma'arat HaMachpela, Chalo Muhuma Rabati. He caused a great riot when he got there. Hu avar at Gvul Sheva HaMadregot. He went past the 7 steps that you're allowed to go. Okay, he went all the way. Madrigal Al pi isor memshala hamandatora britit. Even the British said it. So he says. So he says, "Dashkatzen ma'agenya un uztar men nicht." He says, the Goyim, of course, he said shkatzim. Okay, the Goyim are going to stop us from going up. So he got as far as Hamadrega Ha'achatasra. He got to the 11th step, and then a riot broke out, and all the Hasidim rushed him into the cab to take him back to Yerushalayim. So he got out okay, but the riot went on into the night between the Jews and the Arabs that remained behind. There are just some stories you say to yourself, "Oh, I wish I was there. Well, if only I could have been there for that. That must have been amazing." But anyways, so all of this is wonderful. Okay. However, there's also a halacha that you're not supposed to daven in a cemetery. Now, if I was talking to a male audience, many of you would have experienced what I'm going to mention now. And when men are wearing their tzitzis out, the minhag is to take your tzitzis and stick them inside your pants if you go to a cemetery. There's a principle that's called loeg larosh. You shouldn't make fun of someone who doesn't have something. In other words, we can perform mitzvot, and the people in the cemetery can't. So what we say is we don't want to make fun of them and flaunt doing mitzvot in front of them. So one of the things that generally people don't do in cemeteries is daven. And that's the next halacha that I'm bringing down here. It is forbidden to daven, learn Torah, or wear talit and tefillin within 4 amot of a kever. Within 4 amot, so that's about 6 feet or so, 6 to 8 feet of a kever, or within the walls of a cemetery. Nonetheless, the custom is to permit davening and Torah learning near the kever of a tzaddik. So here we go. Normally we say you can't daven in or learn in a cemetery. However, you go to many of these wonderful, wonderful memorials to the Imahot and the Nevi'im and the Avot. You go to Kever Rachel, there's a kollel that sits and learns there. There's people learning all day long in Ma'arat HaMachpela. So in Kever of Shmuel, the assumed Kever of Shmuel in Nebi Samuel, again, has a kollel that's sitting and learning there all day long. So how can they do this? Okay. So he gives some examples. This is sort of funny. Nevertheless, the custom is to permit davening and Torah learning near the kever of a tzaddik. And thus we see minyanim for prayers take place at the kever of Rachel Imeinu, the Avot in Hebron, the Rambam in Tveria, and the Rebbe, Zohar in Queens. The Rebbe keeps good company, Baruch Hashem. Okay. And many other kfarim throughout the world. This is permitted under several grounds which are independent of each other. Now, there are reasons why we allow this. Number one, the prayer that takes place by the tzaddik is done in the merit of the tzaddik and is thus considered for his benefit. In other words, normally, I'm not sure people daven in the merit of the tzaddik as much as they daven, hoping that the merit of the tzaddik helps them. But okay, I'll accept this version. 2, it is common to build a mechitza around the kever and is permitted to daven even within 4 amot of a kever if there's a mechitza surrounding it. And we see, especially in Chutz La'aretz, that's very common. However, 3, the kevarim of the Zadikim in Eretz Yisrael, it's different. They were made with a space in the kever itself above where the aron or the goof, the coffin or the body was. And that space, we say, interrupts the flow of tumah. So in Eretz Yisrael, a lot of these problems don't exist. as opposed to in Chutz La'aretz, where we just bury directly above. Now, in Eretz Yisrael, we don't do this anymore. We're talking about the built-up kvarim and memorials that used to be in Eretz Yisrael, the tziyunim. Number 4, learning and davening by the Avot and Imam is permitted as they lived prior to the giving of the Torah, and hence the concept of loeg l'rosh, of making fun of them that they can't do it. They don't feel that lack because there was no Torah as yet in their lifetimes. They were, even though they may have kept the Torah, they weren't obligated. Okay. The above allowance only applies to the kvarim of the tzaddik is segregated from other kvarim. If, however, the grave is in the midst of other graves without a mechitza to separate between them, then it is permitted. Then it is forbidden to daven there, and that's what happens in Tzfat. In Tzfat, there are a lot of tzaddikim, but people don't daven in the cemetery. They daven on this like balcony above the cemetery because there are regular graves, mixed in with the graves of the great Zadikim. There's a wonderful man whose name I have to apologize. I can't remember his name, but I've met him. I met him many years ago. Now it's his son who does it. There's a family of people that paint the graves of the Tzadikim in Tzfat. No one pays them. This is an act of chesed for the family that they've been doing it for generations, and they paint them blue. The graves of the famous graves of the great tzaddikim in the main cemetery in Tzfat are painted blue by it's a Sephardic family. Like I said, has been doing it for generations. And if you happen to be lucky enough to be there when they're painting, they'll talk to you about it, and it's very moving, and they talk. I mean, they talk to guests, but they talk to the tzaddikim. It's like they'll talk to the Ari, and they'll talk to Rav Moshe Cordovera, and they'll talk to the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber. It's very, very sweet if you get a chance to witness it. And they talk to them, and then before they leave the kever, they ask for mechila in case they didn't do a good job. Of very much like a Chevra Kedisha does. It's one of those very sweet mitzvot that I had a chance to observe. Okay, so we see that even though it's normally a problem to daven at grave sites, we say a kalmali, but we don't actually do tefillah. And the kalmali, again, we believe is in ways that we're not quite clear of. That they do have some merit for the deceased, so that's why we can do it. But generally, we don't daven in cemeteries. Okay, but then we say, well, why do people go to cemeteries? And there are minhagim to visit cemeteries. We all know that many people visit the cemetery on a yard site. The Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles, brings down a custom to visit Kivrei Avot. He meant your own parents before Rosh Hashanah. So in Elul, a lot of people go to visit their parents' graves. In Eretz Yisrael, many of us go to Ma'arat HaMachpela, go to Hebron to fulfill this because our parents are buried in Chutz La'aretz. So there are minhagim. And there are also minhagim to go to cemeteries on Tisha B'Av. I remember Rabbi Soloveitchik used to go to visit his father's grave in Boston during the day on Tisha B'Av. He would be teaching the keynotes all day long, and then when it was 6 o'clock, someone would say to him, "I have to take it to your father's grave," and they would drive him over to the cemetery. So there are times when it's a minhag to visit visit cemeteries and to visit your parents or tzadikim in general. So why do people do that? As the Gemara in Tainus asks. Why would everyone go to the cemetery? Why would people go to the cemetery? In Tainus, it was talking about go to the cemetery because there was a bitzoret, there was a drought. So why would they go? So number one, to proclaim that we are considered before Hashem as the dead. We're saying, Hashem, don't give us rain. It's like we're dead ourselves. However, the second reason, so the dead should pray for mercy on our behalf. And this is also a very, very important, that we somehow believe in this concept of zchut avot, that somehow in the merit of our ancestors, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does things for us. And when we ask for things from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. We do it in the merit of our ancestors, and that's not only true of the patriarchs, it's true, of our own parents too. I would add, he says that we are considered before Hashem as the dead. I think that I would say it differently, and I think that the Gemara really means this. It's important for us to periodically remind ourselves of our mortality. I know when we were young, we all thought, we're going to live forever type thing. But as we get older, and we know that's not true, it is important to remind ourselves of that our time here is limited, and therefore let's use it well. And I think that going to the cemetery does that. Now, whenever we go up to Boston, I always make a pilgrimage, up to to my parents' kvarim in Boston, and here in Yerushalayim, Baruch Hashem, our Rivka's parents, and we try to make it there a couple of times a year, especially for the yahrzeit. Their yahrzeits are very close in the calendar. Okay, the Bach. That's Rabbi Yoel Circus, Bayit Chadash. That's not Johann Sebastian, if anyone. That's different Bach. Okay, the Bach, Rabbi Yoel Circus quotes the opinion of Reb Chaim Paltiel, a student of the Maharam of Rottenburg, that the custom to visit graves and to daven there is close to Dorish El Hametim. Whoa, that's very bad. There are many prohibitions in the Torah, about 20 of them, about doing things that smack of magic. And one of the things that smacks of magic that we're not allowed to do is to go to soothsayers who basically have a seance. One of the things that's prohibited is to ask for advice from those who have passed on. And we know Shaul HaMelech did it, and that was considered, one of his sins, that we're not supposed to go to the dead. So some people say, oh, no, don't go to cemeteries, don't go to these kvarim, kvarot, because that smacks of this idolatrous magic type of custom. And that's what some of the great scholars of Eastern Europe were saying in the late Middle Ages, early modern period. It was acceptable for Kalev to daven in Hebron, and we know that it says that all of the spies went up going north, but it says only one of them came into Hebron. And so the Midrash says, the one that went into Hebron was Kalev, who davened at Ma'arat HaMachpela, just like we do today, for their merit to help him in this tremendous nisayon, this tremendous trial of being one of the spies. But you can't count that one. Why? Where a great Zadikim connects with a great place, but for lesser folk to go to lesser places is unhelpful and potentially damaging. So there are people who are less enamored of this idea of going to cemeteries. However, we see that that even though there are halachic authorities that see problems with it, but it's not so. We'll see the way out. But for less folk to go to less places is unhelpful and potentially damaging. Better for them to give to tzedakah the money that they would have spent on the trip, which is an interesting thing. If you're spending a lot of money to get to the kever of your grandfather, maybe just give the money to tzedakah. Wouldn't that be better for everyone? The Chai Adam rules. Chai Adam, of course, Avram Danzig, writing in the beginning of the 19th century, rules in halacha that one may even should go to Kvarim on Erev Rosh Hashanah. That's our custom, brought down by the Ramah and the Mishnah Berurah, that we should do it, but must be very careful indeed not to address any requests to the Meitim. Yes, we can talk to them and let them know what's on our minds, and yes, that's wonderful, but we shouldn't necessarily be asking them to do anything on our behalf. That is problematic.
What about the custom of
That's Ma'arat Yosher is not everyone likes the idea of Ma'arat Yosher.
It's asking them to be emissary in our behalf.
I understand, but not everyone likes that idea. Not everyone's happy with that idea, that because we're not supposed to be davening to people other than, So when you say you're trying to be very careful, I'm not davening to you, I'm asking you, but it's that it's a lot of people are not very, very uncomfortable with that, which is why you never heard me say that at a funeral. Okay. As this would be close to Dorish Alametim. This seems to be, trying to, talk to the dead. Rather, one should go to daven to God in the merit of the tzaddik. May the zchut, the merit of this tzaddik, help my prayers get to heaven, rather than saying, oh, Mr. Tzaddik, would you help my prayer get to heaven? Now, it's all in the way you do it. Now, you got to get around the halachic problem there. Okay, the Zohar, on the other hand, now the Zohar, of course, is more mystical, less halachic in its approach, obviously. The Zohar explains that Dorish Alametim only applies when approaches the truly dead. In fact, the Zadikim who have passed on to Olam Haba are considered to be alive in a real spiritual sense. In other words, we say, Zadikim are Chaim afilu b'mitotam, that righteous people are alive even in their physical death, and Rishayim are Meitim afilu b'chayehem, and wicked people are really spiritually dead even in the midst of their physical life. Okay, so the Zohar says, not enough. It's a real tzaddik. You can talk to the tzaddik because he's really alive. Okay, again, not everyone agrees with this position. I personally like the position of saying, I hope in the merit of this tzaddik. That's what's written on the wall by Rabbi Balanes in Tveria. In the merit of Rabbi Meir. Not that we're talking to Rabbi Meir. Okay. I just lost the place. This is a well-known hashkafic principle that tzaddikim live on after death, but it seems here to have a halachic application too. The Maharal opposed the tefillah machnise rachmim in slichot. Now, during slichot, at the end of slichot, I don't know how many of you say slichot. It's not that not that many women say slichot with any regularity. But at the end of slichot, we say tachnan, regular old tachnan, And then right after you put your head down, there is a custom to say a few paragraphs in Aramaic that are actually seem to be addressed to angels. Now, it's my custom, and like most Lithuanians, to not say those paragraphs, because we only address our bakashot, our requests, to God, not to any intermediary whatsoever. That smacks of other religions, not ours. So that those paragraphs are very controversial, even though there are some Hasidim, especially and some Sfardim, that say different versions of them. I've always considered it to be a difficult situation. The Maharal opposed the Tefillah Machnise Rachmim and Slicha on the basis that it appears the Malachim are being used as intermediaries to take out Tefillah to God. However, with regards to Kivrei Tzadikim, he explains that the Niftarim who have passed on, that those who are physically dead, are still considered to be part of Klal Yisrael. So therefore, they're not. So the Maharal, who says you can't daven to angels, but you can include Tzadikim in your in your davening, because you're joining with them, and it's as if they're Keilu alive, and can be joined together to daven when the Jewish people need rachamim. The Chatam Sofer explains further that the Jewish people are all one neshama, so it's different. Angels are different than tzaddikim. There's a famous story. There's a synagogue about a quarter of a mile, a few blocks from Ma'arat HaMachpela, and there's a shul in this little Jewish enclave. There's between Ma'arat HaMachpela and this Jewish enclave, there are Arab businesses and homes, and this area is called the Beit Knesset Albavinu, and they refurbished this synagogue, which was from, I'm going to say it was from the 16th or 17th century. And they refurbished it, and it's very beautiful today. And they call it the Synagogue of Albavinu because of a story. It's a famous story that one Friday night, well, there's different versions. Someday it was Kol Nidre, someday it's just Friday night. Doesn't make any difference to the story. So that they only had 9 people, and they really wanted to daven, and they were waiting. And finally, an old man with a long white beard comes into the shul, and everybody's very happy, and they daven. They daven up a storm, and then when davening's over, everybody turns to where that old man had been standing, because if it's the Shabbos version, they all wanted to invite him over for the Shabbos meal. Depends on your version of the story. And of course he's not there. And then the rabbi says, well, of course he's not there. We don't need him for a minyan anymore. It was Avram Avinu, right, who came to make the minyan, which is a beautiful story. But then, some kid raises his hand and says, wait a minute. He's dead. He can't daven. He says, tzadikim never die. So, that's like the whole thing behind this halachic discussion. Tzadikim are still alive, in whatever that means. In some spiritual way, they're still alive, so that they can daven and be part of this. And you're not doing that avodah zarah magic shtick. Okay. The tzaddikim are therefore being brought in not as intermediaries to pray on our behalf, but as the leaders of our people. They're more like a shliach tzibur. They're more like our representatives. And this sort of fits in with the Melitz Yosher business, except we do it for everybody. So I don't know, it's true for tzaddikim. I don't know if it's true for every funeral we go to. So anyways, I don't do it, even though it's it sounds nice when it gets said. Okay. The tzaddikim different, but as leaders of people, this is simply an extension of the general principle that one should go to a chacham to ask him to daven for him. We ask people to, some, God forbid, somebody doesn't feel good. I mean, minimizing. Someone's got a, real machala, and we ask people to daven, and but that's living people. But if we say that Zadikim are still with us, then, why not ask Zadikim too? And so a lot of that would really, would really seem to be efficacious. And now I don't know why I ended with the Munkancha Rav. I think I ended with the Munkancha Rav. I know it's a Hasidic Rebbe. It was also called the Munkancha Rav because he was a big posek as well as a Hasidic Rebbe, tremendous Talmud Chacham, but very anti-Zionistic. So the Munkancha Rebbe is very clear that there is a mitzvah to daven at Kivrei Tzadikim, as can be seen from many places in our Gemara and in our history. And as we can see from the fact that, there are many times a year when Ma'arat HaMachpela is, Baruch Hashem, packed with Jews, who want to daven in, together with Avram Yitzchak Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Leah. It's very, very special. When you're saying Shmona Esrei in Ma'arat Machpela, and you say the phrase Lishenei Afar, you just mentioned Avram Yitzchak Yaakov, and in the second paragraph you mentioned Lishenei Afar, those who are sleeping in the dust. That's who's there. That's who's there. Are those our patriarchs, our Bobbies and Zadis, who are resting in the dust, and it's just very, very special. And so I just think that that this week is a good time to think about it. Number one, because we acquire, it's the week when we acquire Ma'arat HaMachpela, our first purchase in Eretz Yisrael. And number two, davening is a big issue in this week's Torah reading, of course, because of Yitzchak Avinu, who comes into the field, and he's lasuach b'sadeh, whatever that means. He may be meditating, he may be davening, he may be talking to Hashem. Whatever the word lasuach exactly means is a big debate. Most people believe it is in one of the languages of tefillah. I like meditate. But everyone can choose their own translation. So davening is also a major topic in this week's parsha. And so, since we're talking about davening, the one thing that I always have in mind, Parshas Chayei Sarah, is that every year, many hundreds, sometimes thousands of people go to Hebron for Parshas Chayei Sarah. I remember back in the 90s, one of my daughters went almost every year. And I was always afraid that on both sides there's some hotheads. I mean, Baruch Hashem, our hotheads don't hurt us, but there are people on both sides who can sadly do irresponsible things. And so I hope we'll all pray this week that it should be very, very peaceful for the people that go to Ma'arat HaMachpela this Shabbos to commemorate, our first foothold here in Eretz Yisrael. And I hope everyone, makes it their business to make some visits to Ma'arat HaMachpela. It's a very, very special place, and sensing that connection to the Avot and Imahot is a very, very important part of our experience in Jewish tradition and Jewish law, and especially in tefillah. Okay, I'm running out of gas here with my cold, but Baruch Hashem, I made it to the end. I crawled to the end line. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for joining in this week. I want to thank almost everyone. It seems a lot of people were responding to Gail, and the get-together that Bezrat Hashem will have the Monday before Hanukkah. And for those who can't, we'll do our best to broadcast it and to record it. Okay, thank you, Margaret. And again, thank you all so much for.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a great week, everyone.
You
Bye-bye.
too.
Thank you.
Dash Hansma.
Thank
Okay.
you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye all. Thank you.